Oh,
Hello, hello, hello. How's it going?
gorgeous. Look at that hair. You look like you look like a pop star from 90s Irish wave.
That'd be about right, yeah. What don't they call that something or other? Some sort of compliment that men give women that is kind of damning with faint praise, like.
A backhanded compliment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, let's not use men and backhand in the same sentence right now. I'm trying to fly under the No, I'm kidding. It doesn't matter. They're gonna come after me no matter what.
They really are, aren't they? They really are.
The way that I confronted that whole thing was to relentlessly mock everybody involved by showing up in my bathrobe and no shirt on and reading a silly ass like back and forth drama
That's why you
chat,
were
you
called
know?
Bathrobe Guy. I was like, who the f- is Bathrobe Guy? And then somebody said, it's Benjamin Boyce. And I was like, wow, curiouser
Yeah.
and curiouser. I didn't know that bit.
No, I've done that before. Like whenever I find an article that I think is frankly ridiculous and entirely insane and dangerous, just like to show up first thing in the morning with a cup of coffee in my bathrobe and read and think through it, to kind of put it in perspective. It's like, look, we're human beings.
Yeah,
This is frankly
yeah.
ridiculous. You know.
It is, but I'll be really honest, there is a slight difference because you and I kind of came into this movement, I would argue, because of, certainly I would hope for you and I, we wanted the truth to come out, we wanted debate, we saw a problem and we wanted to address it and genuinely, not that we were crusaders, but that we were engaged enough to think, yeah, this is actually important
Yeah.
and we need to speak about it. In our defense, you can be trite, but it was a decision. It was a kind of, whoa, you know what I mean? This is big. And in we went. And, I got so much over the years, and I'm sure you did, so much attacks from TRAs. And I expected them and I withstood them and I could handle them because I understood where they were coming from. But when it's bad faith attacks, when it's treachery and leaks from your own side, when it's people who want the same as you, but they want slightly different, and they're willing to do really bad things, that makes you feel a lot kind of more despairing. It hits me a lot
Mm.
deeper. And there's a second part to it, which is, and when you see people who are your friends and colleagues, and they know this is bad faith, and they know this doesn't have any substance, and they know this person is being a bully and wrong, and they choose to look the other way because, frankly, they have enough fights in their hands. That makes me feel very reflective, reflective about what's going on, and reflective about the movement, and reflective about, you know, personal integrity matters. And it's not. Some people just say it's all about the movement, and that's how the Catholic Church turned into the awful thing
Ouch.
it did. Was that the church was over everything? Can you hear me, or is that okay?
No, yeah, I was just
Yeah.
putting in that context. Like that's some heavy stuff you're bringing up there.
Well, yeah. Well,
Back to the
they were
90s
taught.
rock
Yeah.
star thematic thing, except that you have some hair. Sinead
I
O'Connor.
kind of love the idea of a 90s rock star. That's as good as it gets for me. Because I'm actually a 2020s psychotherapist, so it's probably
Yeah.
better than a 90s rock
At what
star.
point did your life take that turn?
Yeah, I'll take that and say thank you very much. Yeah, but I just feel that people think the movement is more important than people. And I just think, nah, personal integrity, it's number one. And after that, everything plays out, but that has to be number one. If you're putting a movement before your personal integrity, I would argue you've lost your way.
It might be a disposition, or it might be some sort of trick of the trade. It might be something inherent in activism or the group dynamics that occur in an activistic milieu. And it is really easy to get swept up in groupthink, especially when the rhetoric is positioned around kind of warlike or
Yeah.
the telos. There's some sort of end goal, or there's some sort of right path, and you see that language creeping in with one of the people that's gone after you, gone after me. There's this fascinating post that she made about going after these different women, you and a couple other people were named, because it's something about being right, and the cause has to come. We're right. We have to win. We have to win this thing. So comment and question and go after this. And the psychodynamics involved in group thinking, group leadership, and then the cause is that dressing up certain motives or certain personality problems or certain life issues, and then allowing somebody to project that onto a canvas outside, or is it just the nature of the game that we're playing?
Yeah, well, when people are as puffed up with this, like you say, self-righteous zeal, that they think that matters more than anything else, and they will, frankly, about me, I don't know what they've done about you, but I get the impression something similar, tell lies and know that they're telling lies. And like, I've had the weirdest things leveled at me from people who are saying things like, let's say the organization I'm part of, Genspect, and that we're trying to secretly, transition children. And it's like, wow, well, that is the most elaborate kind of subterfuge I've ever seen in my life, if Genspect are trying to transition children. And that we believe in surgical, like, without a doubt, we've been as clear as you could be, my nose in the face. Genspect is against, the medical intervention for children. We're against puberty blockers. We're against all medical intervention in the name of gender dysphoria for children. And they lie about it and say, oh, no, that's not true. We're secretly trying to do it. And we're secretly getting funded, which was kind of laughably mad. But still, it sticks. So we're secretly getting funded by the Jennifer Pritzker, the billionaire, who I think she's some very extreme TRA. I don't even know her. Because we're not getting funded by Jennifer Pritzker. It's just extraordinary lies being told by people who say they want the same thing as I want. And it feels really unnerving and really, it makes me feel really uneasy around the movement that I'm involved in, because I realise I'm actually with a lot of people who are ideologues and they're zealots. And it's very important that I don't get swept up and that my organisation, like that Genspect, doesn't get swept up, and that ideologue is kept at the door. But what you just said earlier was a very good point, which I didn't answer. This happens in movements all the time. If you look at the north of Ireland, and you could see like the history of the North, and you could see at the beginning in the 1960s, they were very much, by the way, very much influenced by the civil rights marches in America, and they did civil rights marches in the North, and there was a really cohesive movement. And then as it moved into the 70s, and as they started to gain notoriety, they started splitting. The vanity of small differences, different groups, everybody furious with each other. Effectively, you could call it would be reductive to say it's infighting, but it happens in every cause. And so if you look over at Africa and Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela, they go this way and that way. It happens in causes all the time. If you look at Russia and stuff, that one person is much more purist than another, and they fight with each other. Rather than realising we all have a similar end goal and we can move towards it, purists by nature cannot be contaminated by anybody who's kind of saying, and I believe in the concept of accept compromise and keep fighting. That's
diplomacy.
I like that.
Yeah,
mad, huh?
Yeah.
I like that, and I think you've got to if you're going to get anywhere. And I just think if you look at the history of Ireland, obviously I know a lot about it, and in 100 years ago our country was formed, kind of 1916 and then 1921, 22. And like the guy, Michael Collins, who really tried to bring Ireland on and tried to bring an independent Ireland to Ireland as such. And he went over to London, and what he did was he gave away 6 counties of Ireland, and he gave us 26, and he signed it. And he knew when he signed that treaty, he said, I've signed my death warrant. And he was right. He was shot in his own home county. He was shot by his own men because they couldn't conceive of the idea that you could accept compromise and keep fighting. He was planning to get the North. He was planning. He had very elaborate plans. I've seen the paperwork. He had his plans, but they couldn't. No, you know what I mean? And so he got shot by his own people. So we're not quite getting shot, but I am feeling very much like this happens in if you know your history, it happens in every movement. Purists and diplomats, they just don't like each other. They don't gel.
Well,
and that's where we're at.
The problem with the purist is that they don't have the principles to not get backstabby. I mean, their principles dictate that backstabbing is necessary, right? So how do the diplomats differentiate or maintain power over the ruthless? How does the centrist or the diplomat maintain power over the authoritarian?
Yeah.
Well, especially in a pickup group, especially in something that's just a cause that people are joining in, right? Where there is there's no governmental, structure of government that displaces power.
Yeah, it's the Wild West. Well, I suppose I've obviously studied a lot of this. As you know, I have a book coming out, Bully-Proof Kids in the UK, and it's out in the end of March. And it's all about bullying, but it's very much about dynamics. It's about, I called it Bully-Proof Kids, but the concept of it was how to equip yourself when you meet tricky people. And you will always meet tricky people. That's the concept. You know what I mean? It's not as if you can't actually put on a bully-proof vest and you will never be bullied.
Yeah.
I'm very well aware of that. But you can certainly reduce the impact on some level. But there does, and I say it in quite extensive detail in the book, sometimes you go beyond retrieval of a situation, if you follow me. And what it's down to more than anything is if the behavior is that bad, if you've been dehumanized, that's when you just have to think, I lost, I need to leave this. Once you've been dehumanized, it's very hard to come back. And so you can look at different points in history where you think that group of people got dehumanized and they haven't really retrieved. And if your child is in school and they've been dehumanized by the group, then basically need to leave the school. There's very little. Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible aspect of group dynamic that they start dehumanizing, let's say, the villain that they've targeted. Mm-hmm. And that's what frightens me about what's happening here in let's say, the movement around gender. Is I really think that some people are dehumanizing other groups. And I think it's the most insidious, destructive thing a human can do. And actually, it doesn't matter how good your beliefs are. What reflects on you as a person is how good your behavior is. And so if your behavior is kind of lost at the expense of your beliefs, well, you've lost your way. You're not a good person because your behavior is everything. I really believe it. And I really believe that every society, whether it's the Danes during World War II, they were phenomenal, and they really looked after the Danish Jews. And they had this concept of looking after your neighbour in Denmark, and it turns out that it's either 96 or 98% of the Danish Jews got away with their lives. And the reason why is that the other Danes looked after them because they had a concept called solidarity. They had a concept of you look after your fellow man. And so they gave them papers, false papers to get out of the country. They harboured them in attics. They looked after them. They intervened. They got them on ships out of Denmark. Now, obviously, there's a geographical advantage that they did have. But the fact is they were commended as a country of what they did around World War II because they had this concept of you look after your fellow man. Now, movements kind of really need solidarity. And what's really interesting, I think, about people like myself and yourself who are interested in what's happened in gender and the medicalization of children is we're often lone wolves and we're often independent thinkers. And it's like a group of lone wolves have kind of barreled into a room on their own and we're all together and we're all incredibly individualistic people. That's our defining kind of character. That's our common characteristic. Yeah. So we're not gelling as a movement. There isn't a feeling of where's the cohesive, who's got each other's back. And I really think, and I'd really like to be part of something that is part of a solidarity movement of like cohesive, looking out for each other. And I'm not saying that you're not like the Catholic Church, but you've just got a general kind of brother to brother, sister to sister. I look out for you. If I see lies being said about you, Benjamin, I'd like a situation where I'll say, I'll speak up. And if you see lies being said about me, you'll speak up. That's all right. That's how movements have worked for thousands of years. And we've collectively forgotten it in this particular movement. And it's a very sad indictment on this movement.
Well, I think it has to do with certain personality types where solidarity means agreement. When there are certain people who are very literalist and have trouble with ambiguity in certain circumstances, especially when emotions are turned up or when the stakes are high. Ambiguity is a luxury that gets taken away, and it snaps into a literalism. It snaps into a fundamentalism, and when the conditions are such that fundamentalism takes root or triggers certain people, especially certain people who have a certain amount of charisma, chutzpah, and drive to gain an audience or to drive the conversation, to drive the movement, then that's where you have this slippage from solidarity into unity in a very, very rigid fascistic form, right? And navigating that, I've seen time and again, it has to do with personalities, and it also has to do with the environment. When the environment emotionality is turned up, then it triggers some sort of tribal agreement level connection where we have each other's backs, and anybody who doesn't has to get stabbed in the back on very literalist grounds. It's almost like the higher cognitive thinking breaks down. Either people aren't able to access that, or the emotions disallow that, or maybe somebody's a bad actor and says we can do away with this if we just make people think in this highly emotional way and start throwing around accusations of the worst possible sort so that their followers say, oh, of course, why would this person lie because they're right so often? Why would they lie about this other group? Of course they're transing children if this person says it, right? Even though their entire website says to the opposite. So it's just
thousands of words explaining why we're against it. Yeah, I think you're right, and you're being very understanding, and I do understand the concept of the bully is generally, and I go into it a lot in Bully Proof Kids, that the bully is generally somebody who's seeking power, and then there's the sidekicks who are maintaining, they're basically getting a bit of power by hanging out with the bully, if you follow me. And what people often forget, and I like to remind myself at the moment especially, but when I'm dealing with anybody around bullying, is that it's funny. It's witty, if you follow me. Bullying is often very funny. So when there's a pile-on, it can be very funny when you're reading the comments. And people forget that. There's a gleeful humour in bullying, whether it's a 10-year-old or whether it's I'm 47 or something. Do you know what I mean? That it's easy to kind of laugh and giggle at the pile-on because the comments are actually genuinely in and of themselves witty.
Okay.
And that's how pile-ons happen, if you follow me, because of the humour. The humour lures them in.
Okay. So let's just say you go to Twitter, somebody says something really dumb, like really dumb, which people do. Yeah. And then you're like, well, I can pile on, but there's so many jokes that I can tell about this. So I'll see something and then I'll tell a joke about this thing. Like somebody said, he's like, I'm going to paraphrase this tweet. It's like, don't get me wrong, nuclear war is really, really bad, but the main source of predictor of survival is optimism and a good attitude and prepping. And then he linked this article about coconut oil and storing coconut oil for nuclear winter. It's like, it was just so out there. And it's like, how can you not? I'm sorry, dude, but that's stupid. I have to joke about this, right? So that's what you mean with the humor. It's the...
Well, you see, I'm with you because I love humour, and I think we have to protect the right to be funny. I think to the death.
Okay.
The jesters in medieval courts were allowed to tell jokes. In the most oppressive regimes in the world, we're allowed to have comedians. And the comedian is almost seeing its day at the moment. Like, comedians are getting cancelled left, right, and centre. I always thought, funnily enough, that this woke culture, it would be the comedians that would lead the attack against it. I always thought the comedians will just kick back and say, we're funny. And that's allowed. But they haven't. They very much bent the knee. So they haven't. So I do agree that humour is essential. It's essential to well-being. It's essential for a light, vibe around life. But I suppose that's where we have to bring in our own kind of judgment and think, jumping in on a pylon is different than telling a joke. So you could, let's say, tell a joke about coconut oil, right? Coconut oil man. And I could laugh. But I could also have a look and say, there's 37,000 comments underneath that kid's tweet. Let's leave him alone. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? While if it was 3 tweets, you can say, yeah, that's not a pylon, that's humour. And I know that sounds like a really fuzzy way, but that's the new way. If there's a pylon, stay the hell away from it. And I think, honestly, I think children should be taught social media etiquette, and never join in a pylon should be one of them. That if everybody's piling on, you do not press like and you don't make a comment, even if it's hilarious. Tell somebody beside you. Touch the grass.
Interesting. So you're advocating for self-control.
Mad ideas going on here. Like solidarity and self-control and humour. Like, this is out there, I know.
Well, I
We're
like
just going to have to try and go there, yeah.
This is a very nuanced, very fence-sittery conversation that we're in, because just like solidarity, like there's a moment where there's a way in which solidarity and cohesion in a group is absolutely essential, and then there's a way in which that same principle becomes the destroyer of the group, or the destroyer of higher functioning relationships within the group, because it turns into purity rather than solidarity. It becomes purity, right? So the same thing with humor. Humor is collective expression. Yeah. It's a good thing. It also has an ability to be incredibly cruel. And again, it goes back to that, the principle you're talking about dehumanizing. So there's a way to be funny and joke about what the person said and not the person, and not to demean the idea is stupid, but not necessarily
and the good comedians
hate
can do
the idiocy, love the idiot kind of thing, right? So there's a principle, like it's a tightrope to walk that, but you can start to hear where people are being cruel for some other purpose than to call out something as stupid or whatever.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think we all know. Remember when you were a kid, you knew that the cruel humoured guy and you knew the funny guy who would still mock you, but there was a genuine, reveling in the humour of it. Yeah. And then there was the one who always, there's a phrase in Ireland, always the bitter word, who just always had the bitter word in front of me. And I think we all know the difference. But I don't actually think the people who are, let's say, for example, piling on you and I don't think they are suffering from too much humour. I really don't. I would say they're suffering from a lack of humour. And I think that has an issue in and of itself. Like, self-righteousness doesn't give an awful lot of humour.
Yeah. Well, there was an instance on your and Sasha's podcast. Brilliant podcast. Good. Let's plug it. Gender Wider Lens.
Thank
Absolutely
you.
Essential. Just, you guys are doing amazing work.
That's very nice.
You had Michael Bailey on, and you joked about, Sasha popped off a joke about The Man Who Would Be Queen, which is about autogynephilia, and she's like, and she was like, "Go ahead and read it to your." She said something about read it to your child at night.
Yeah,
right?
I remember. Right. So what we'd done an intense hours conversation with Michael Bailey, who wrote a book called The Man Who Would Be Queen, which is all about autogynephilia, a serious book, a heavy book about autogynephilia. And it was the very end of the interview, and there's a certain kind of, we're finished now, you know what I mean? And we did 2 mistakes in that breath. And my God, we have been lacerated. And you're laughing. It has haunted me.
So
2 mistakes that I was in the vicinity of. I was there, I was looking, and I have been haunted by these 2 mistakes. So the 2 mistakes, the massive mistakes were, one, Sasha said, you should read it to your children. obviously being funny. Obviously, you shouldn't read a book like that to your children. It doesn't even need saying. And the second thing was they started laughing about it. And that was it. That was just a throwaway remark. And there was videos made saying why you shouldn't make, believe it or not, videos made explaining why one shouldn't read this book to your children. Okay, right?
It's like when the Babylon Bee gets fact checked. Of course, CNN doesn't actually have a laundry machine that they put the news in. Like like Reuters or whatever going after.
And the second thing was actually very upsetting because a huge amount of videos were made about this one, and a huge amount of pile-on. I was very badly piled on, and I'm still hearing about it to this day. And it was months ago. And what it was Mike Bailey, who studied and whose career was really, really badly lacerated by accusations from TRAs of paedophilia, of being called a Nazi. His children's pictures were put online, and there was awful comments made around their father and paedophilia. And he was like his college where he worked was really, really, really targeted. He had really suffered from TRA. And
just to the benefit of Northwestern University, they did not fold under the pressure. This is another era. This is 20 years ago. He maintained his position, as so far as I know.
Yeah, so. But he did also get very badly.
Yeah, not to minimize
because he was talking about it, and he said for years he was basically, as you and I might be feeling right now, and I don't think people understand this because I've worked a lot with people who've been bullied, disoriented, and that you can't quite find your mojo, you can't find where you're at because you can't quite concentrate. And he said he was distracted for years. Distracted because you're being attacked. If you're being attacked, you're constantly looking over, if you follow me. And so the second kind of misstep that happened at the end of that podcast was we mentioned something about autogynephilia, and could it possibly be a kind of, could there be an inherited component of it? Now, we don't know because it's the most unstudied phenomenon that there is almost. It's incredibly unstudied. And so we don't know. And so I think anybody who thinks they know, frankly, are being arrogant because there is no research. So how the hell do they know? And we do know that there's often a hereditary component in lots of things, but it doesn't mean that means you're going to get it. Like you might have, for example, a gene that's susceptible to alcoholism, to depression, to lung cancer, and to diabetes. But because of the way you live, you might only get diabetes and not get the others. So it's how the nature is nurtured. So nobody is saying, if you have this, off you go. Nobody is saying there's any sort of predetermined situation, but there might be a component because it is noticeable that, for example, we've heard anecdotally of fathers and sons. We've heard of brothers, if you follow me. So it's like that's interesting. It could be all nurture. It could be a little bit of some sort of inherited component. Now, me saying that is apparently a really, really dangerous thing because one should never say that in the company of certain people who believe it's all about your nurture. And I just think that's a very reductive way of looking at things, if you ask me. Yeah, a lot of people think that. So what happened was he spoke about a 5-year-old. I said, was there any sort of child or something like that who's ever showed any sort of autogynephilic tendencies? And he said there was a study by Ken Zucker about a 5-year-old who was masturbating and he was using some sort of women's clothes. Now, that sounds like a really shocking statement, and it is a shocking statement in many, many ways. But anybody who's had kids would know that young children sometimes, not always, but sometimes they masturbate. That's number one. Number two, it can be a red flag for sexual abuse, but it's not always. It can be, but it's not always. And that's the truth. So it was a peer-reviewed study, and there was an outcry about Mike Bailey just mentioning that. He was just adding to our information. These guys know so much more than we'll ever know. So he was adding to something that me and Sasha have been wondering about when we hear about brothers or fathers and sons and stuff. And we were lacerated for that because we were told this was a red flag. Now, this was a study from 1997. And so were we going to get Child Protection Services to go to this house of this 31-year-old who was in a study 26 years ago? Like it didn't make sense, if you follow me, that people were saying that this was an anti-safeguarding comment and it was red flags, and we needed to basically call the ambulance about it. And it's like, when you have a study, and I know the 90s were different than they are today, and maybe there wasn't the proper checks and balances done on this child. However, there's no reason to believe there wasn't. It was a proper, it was a proper analysis that went through peer review, and it was an interesting addition to our knowledge base. But yet again, this feeling of zealotry and silencing and censorship, and you will not speak about certain things. And I just think we've got to speak out, and we've got to speak out again and again. And if you're being silenced, you need to speak out, because that is the only way we're going to have a better society. And you have to fight back against this. But anyway, we got really badly attacked for that comment, basically. Just shocking.
Sorry to get nuanced, and not to minimize the stress or the having to filter that out and figure out how to form a relationship, which we could talk about how to form a relationship to internet bullying is something that I've had to learn. It's something that everybody has to learn. If you're going to speak out, you're going to get blowback.
Yeah,
if you have any sort of platform above a certain magic number, and you don't even have to be really big, but if you have some sort of even charisma and you're a small account on Twitter, let's say, you become a threat in these different discourses, because a lot of people are treating culture as a war, right? It's not just the culture war. It's just people interact with culture as though their culture is war.
The war.
So, but you can look at, there are certain triggers that certain audiences, or let's say groups of people have. They have what binds and blinds them together is a moral compass, to reference Jonathan Haidt. And you can see that there's different communities that have these different triggers to them. Even the IDW or whatever the post-IDW thing was, it's like we would go around free speech. Free speech would be the trigger thing. When somebody's being silenced or canceled, a lot of us would find that as the vector where we'd start to recognize each other in this anonymous space or semi-anonymous space, depending on how anime or Greco-Roman avatar you are or not, in my case. So you'd start to find common cause with people based on a moral matrix. And then there are groups of people who have histories. There's these histories of these activist movements that exhibit over decades particular behaviors and have certain triggers. And so at this point in time, even though I've done so much to platform as many feminists as would speak to me and explore the gender critical side and explore all the different varieties of feminism and done a lot to just platform them for really no gain, really, to me, a very marginal amount of views, because my audience coming from the anti-SJW side really is not interested in feminism, because at least in the history of anti-SJWism, feminism was the first thing that started to try to bully people into, giving up their video games or whatever, right? So, me making bridges and trying to have a good faith discussion and exploratory discussion, sacrificed my audience to a certain degree, and then it also started to generate goodwill with this feminist community. But still within the feminist community, there's certain behaviors, or there's certain triggers, moral triggers, and one of them would be male sexuality. They have a very hard time thinking objectively about male sexuality, and then also safeguarding around children, and then also this nature over nurture thing. Even though they're being raked over the coals by transgender ideology, they still have a hard time, and this is just a behavior of probably a small minority. They get really triggered whenever somebody says, biology doesn't stop at the neck. It actually happens in the head too, and male brains and female brains, they exhibit different behaviors and stuff. So you can see that you will run aground or afoul of that community in those two statements. That those two missteps are just the same pattern of moral triggering, because they cohesify around safeguarding children, male sexuality, and nature over nurture, or blank slateism.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think feminism has 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 been a very interesting journey for me in feminism the last few years, because an awful lot of feminists have been so well educated and well informed around gender, and they've been so instructive to me, and it's been so helpful. I've seen some people's analysis of, grooming and things like that, and I'm like, wow, that is a really phenomenally clever and brilliant take on it, and I thank them for it. However, I don't thank any movement that doesn't seem to be able to handle disagreement. And I think that is a really important aspect. And that's where, if you ask me, that's where we need leaders, and that's where we need people who'll stand up and say, we're a group, we need to stay together, and we need to have integrity. And I remember talking, can I just say, I remember talking to a few feminists about this. And I said, the leaders of this movement need to stand up, and they need to seek better behaviour, because there's awful bullying happening. And I was told that that was a very patriarchal concept, and that really feminism, obviously this would be radical feminism, but they don't do leadership, if you follow me. That's not how we roll. And it's like, yeah, and you can see that. It's rudderless. It needs leadership. It would really benefit from leadership, because sometimes, plenty of great women leaders in the world, they really bring people together, and the best comes out of it. And apparently this is talking from my patriarchal framework, and I shouldn't think like that, and I should think of a more, and it's not working out well. It's not working out well. Again and again and again, you see pretty bad behavior that isn't getting called out, that everybody just goes silent and looks away, and it basically blesses themselves that it's not happening to them. And then there's there was a vague kind of attempt at standing up for people with DSDs. The people with DSDs have been eviscerated really badly.
They're being dehumanized.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Totally dehumanized. And there you go. And I saw them leave collectively, and I messaged them. I know quite a few of them. And I was like, good for you, make your stand, because really and truly this is just rancid, horrible behaviour. And there was a vague attempt at some sort of, leadership, and to say,
I did see that.
Don't stand by this. And it's like, yeah, when people are being dehumanized, if you're a decent person with personal integrity, you stand up for them. You look out for them. You stop it. If it's happening on the street, if it's happening on the bus, if it's happening online, you do your bit to be part of the solution. And if you look the other way, well, how can you sleep at night, basically? That's what I would think.
So back to bullying, then. It's not just enough to understand the psychology and the social dynamics of bullying, and then how to deal with it in your own personal life. But also, if you're going to want to not be for bullies, you have to be some sort of hero, or you have to actually confront them as a third party.
Right. I can I go in on this and talk totally over you, because I'm a woman and I'm more important.
Yeah. My patriarchy can support you.
Yeah, my matriarchy is coming in here, right? And I studied this a huge amount with my book. And what I realized was, when you look at societies, for example, when you look at cultures, and so there's 3 secondary schools. Secondary school is like high school near me, okay? One of them has bullying constantly. Why? Because the kids are coming out to me, and I'm hearing about their bullying, because I'm a psychotherapist. One of them very rarely has bullying, and sometimes sends a bully to me. Not the people who are being bullied, the bully. And one of them has a kind of a sporadic, every so often, bullying. And I've really studied these 3 schools because they're near me. So I've really studied what's going on. Why is one, these are the same kids, same area, if you follow me. And what I've noticed is that it is a culture within the school. And within the school, you can have a culture of bystanding, where effectively the teachers even join in the bullying in the bad school, if you follow me. Everybody, it's each man for himself. It's a competitive, narky, cross and cranky culture, if you follow me. Everybody's feeling a bit embattled, and everybody is out for themselves. The one that is just sporadic, that's just, to me, the bog standard school. And the one that's the kind of a shining example of there's very little bullying in that school is quite heavy on being an upstander as opposed to a bystander. So a bystander sits by, They wring their hands silently. They say, it's terrible, it's terrible. They send private messages to me and you and say, I really don't agree with this. It's awful, everything's awful. I wish I could say something, but I'm just not strong enough. And an upstanding culture does their bit. Now, I'm not saying they have to be a hero. I think that's too much to ask of people, and I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's fair. Because just some people, it's not fair. It's not the way they roll. But I do think they can make sure that they're not part of the problem. They can not laugh. They can not press like. They can certainly retweet people. If you follow me, they can give support in lots of different ways. You don't have to go up against the bully. And so what I often give talks in schools about bullying, and I talk about, you don't confront the bully because you will get attacked yourself. It's too difficult. Don't be a hero. It's too hard. You're putting yourself in the lion's ring. What you need to do instead is smile at the person who's been targeted. Maybe when they're not being targeted, walk over and start talking to them about something else. Maybe if you're a little bit braver, walk over and just stand beside them when they're being targeted. Some level, you don't have to be a hero, you don't have to take on the bully, but you can do a couple of things that will make a difference, a phenomenal difference to that person, if you follow me. There's a million different ways, but they've done studies on this, and they've shown that if somebody's getting attacked by, let's say, a racist on the train, and if you just stand beside the target, that's all you have to do. You don't actually even have to get their eye, you don't have to look at the bully or the racist. You just literally stand beside them. Immediately, you've reduced the bullying. They've studied this. If you start talking to them about, like, when is the next stop? When do I get out of this? You just ask them a question, nothing to do with the bullying. You immediately reduce the bullying as well. And if you speak to them, it's more dangerous. So if you're not up to it, don't. But can you stand beside them? Yes, you can. And that's where I just think we have to ask a little of people. We've come to this weird place in society where we're refusing to ask anything of anybody because we have this concept of, oh, I couldn't ask it of them. And so it's really noticeable for me with a lot, especially young clients that I meet, they don't ask of their friends, could you help me out? Could you give me a lift here? Or could you help me with this? We're very individualistic. It's each man for himself, and it's not working well. We're lonelier and we're more and more isolated. And we need to, like a good friend, you ask, if I ask something of you, and if you did it for me and you would be immediately more intimate, closer friends. So it's an opportunity to invite you into my friendship by asking you to do me a favor, if you follow me. And so if we live together, not together, if we live near each other and I rang you saying, could you possibly give me a lift? I'm really stuck. And you gave to me, we would be the better friends. But we're not doing that. And we're living in this individualistic society that doesn't ask anything of anybody. And it doesn't work because we're feeling very, very isolated. There's way more reports of loneliness than ever before because we're all trying to just operate on our own, don't ask anybody anything. And then we ask way too much of our partner. We're asking so much of her, like, basically, I'm going to collapse of you because you have to do everything. That doesn't work at all. It just doesn't work. We need to kind of be more expectant of our general people around us to be decent, honourable people. I just think we're really sliding into a horrible place if we're going to pretend that I shouldn't expect good behaviour from people who know me and like me.
Yeah, that brings up the question, expecting good behavior, with regard to somebody making a mistake. And I've made mistakes. I've made missteps. I've committed errors online as the avatar of Benjamin Boyce projected into the realm of lights and sounds, the Luciferian domain of this astral social network. And when I have made mistakes, it's only people who I know and who I have some sort of ongoing relationship privately speaking to me about that, or, coming to me and asking for clarification or, in initiating self-reflection on my part, which I don't have a difficult time self-reflecting. Actually, I have a hard time not being so self-reflective in a certain narcissistic or meta way. So when I am expected to do better, it's only through people who I know personally, or or have a sustained relationship, or that I know I can tell they're coming from a good place, that then I can correct myself or apologize or clarify. But if it's a mob, if it's somebody anonymously or a whole group of people calling me out on something, I tend to double down. I tend to say, no, I'm not going to be controlled by the crowd. I don't care even if the crowd is right. I'm not going to be at the beck and call of a crowd. I don't believe in the group. I don't believe in the group. I believe in individual relationships that then can stack up into a culture, into a group. But I don't, the whole moral vector of agreement, disagreement, you're right, you're wrong, all that stuff playing out in this swarm-like behavior. It's not real to me. It's not important to me, even though it can be damaging to me. It can be very stressful to me when it does happen every 3 months, or whatever, But I've learned over time not just to have a thick skin, but to actually locate the good faith actors and then negotiate how to correct a mistake that I did or clarify a misstep, right? So.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's so tiring and distracting and pointless to, if I could catalog and count up how many hours I've spent over those 2 tiny mistakes we apparently made on that podcast. It's such a waste of time. It's like if people choose to read bad things into mistakes. We lost an awful lot when we lost the spirit of intention. And it used to be like if your intention was good, that was good enough. And we've lost that because it's not good enough. Who cares what your intention was?
Why do you think we let that behind?
I don't know. And I'd love to study it. But it used to be that if you didn't know better, you were forgiven. And now it's like, no, even if you don't know better, if you say the wrong word, you'll be cancelled.
You have to be an example.
Yeah, it's this, very puritanical culture that we're living in that is just jaw-droppingly oppressive. But I really think it's really sad that there's so much time being spent. I see you and I see me just wasting our time defending something that I could see in 1 second what you meant. And so could anybody who wanted to, who knows you, who knows your body of work. Just take one look. Oh, yeah, I see what he did. Oh, yeah, you get it. Yeah, that's all that was needed. You know what I mean? Nobody needed any sort of massive analysis. But again and again, these massive analysis, it's like you need to defend yourself. But I just want to point out something around the bullying. Your response is like my own, which is you're a fighter. So there's kind of 4 known responses. Your fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And some people run, some people fight, yourself and myself without a doubt too. And some people freeze. They literally just freeze. They go into freeze state. And a lot of people appease, where they just make friends with the bully. They make, you know what I mean? They're like, you know what I mean? And it's all instinctive as far as I can see. And it's just what we do when we're feeling very attacked. And so when you're feeling attacked, that's where you go to. And when I'm feeling attacked, that's where we go to. I don't think that can be called out in a way because we all have that instinct. You have one of the 4. You're either freezing or you're fighting or you're running away or you're appeasing. You're doing one of them, you know what I mean? We all are. Now, I know they have that distilled into fight or flight, but I think it's more understandable when you see the 4 of them, I think it's more. And I just think we've got to accept that, we're humans, we're animals. And that was the big shock for me when I wrote that book, Bullyproof Kids, was that we are animals, if you follow me. There's a great quote, and the guy who wrote it hundreds of years ago has, of course, been cancelled, and I'll probably be cancelled for saying the quote. But anyway, he says something like, we're born of risen apes, not fallen angels. And the point is, we come from the animal world. We don't come from the angels. And so, if you look at animals, we really don't, though. If you look at the average 2-year-old, and he'll just grab something, and he'll punch his neighbour, mine. And we civilize them. And we civilize them over a period of time. The children, we civilize them. It takes time. And we're trying to appeal to their better instinct so that they'll become healthy, functioning adults. And there's something about the online world that reverts us back into that pack instinct, that kind of, it's the speed of it, I often think, and the dehumanizing aspect of it has made it such a really good cultural pot for bullying. And that's why cyberbullying is so bad. It's it's the speed and the dehumanizing put together, and the humor, memes, gifs, you know what I mean? It's really very funny when you look at these pylons, that you've got, a perfect recipe for bullying that really is a horrible aspect of the online culture. It's really horrible. Can I say one thing? I want to say a little bit, if you don't mind, while I'm on a rant. It's something around, I suppose, the feminist movement that I don't think is kind of said enough. The feminist movement is very interesting, and the sociology around it is fascinating. But I often think it lacks a lot in its psychological insight. And so I'm much more interested in the psychology of a person, and I'm much more interested in how that impacts. And I often think that the feminist movement doesn't really bring in much psychology. It certainly doesn't bring in much biology, and it's all sociology. And so naturally, the psychologists are coming up against the sociologists. And naturally, the biologists are coming up against the sociologists, if you follow me. It's all fine. And if we all behaved well, if there was I saw Jordan Peterson said he was going to do 12 rules of behavior on the internet. If we could behave well, it would be fine. I would disagree with you, you would disagree with me, and we wouldn't lose our minds. We would just disagree like ordinary thinking people in the 1990s. We're in a different era now.
It's funny. I mean, even Jordan Peterson, he's a pugilist when he's on Twitter.
He's a fighter, totally.
He hammers down on people.
He gets furious. But I like I say, I'm very forgiving of that fight, flight, freeze, or repeat. That's just our instinct. That just comes out. It comes out in you, comes out in me, it comes out in all of us. And when you're hungry, or when you're tired, or when you get attacked, it'll just come out. And it's nothing you can do. And we've got to give space around that, because we all do it.
So to follow this sociology, psychology, and biology triad or layers of analysis that are disconnected that you see, where feminism relies over heavily on sociological thinking and group dynamics, and then that feeds into the psychology and ignores the biology in certain explicit ways. But the psychological question would be, if there are tenets of feminism or just basic assumptions that, and you could see it's not a straw man to say that many radical feminists adhere to a belief that there is this historical force called patriarchy that is oppressing women, and that the goal of feminism is to liberate women from patriarchy. That is just the core belief. That is sociological. It's a narrative that exists on a sociological level. When it's translated into psychology, then it begins to have a certain effect on a certain number of actors within that domain, where they see that any hardship or any sort of male behavior that they find offensive or is actually offensive is a part of a worldwide historical manifestation that has always been oppressing every instance of woman throughout time, or recorded history until until the ancient history. So it's just the question on a psychological level is, what is the psychological impact of these beliefs or of this? And I think it is a belief. I think that feminism has a number of different axiomatic principles, and then they translate that into a praxis. There's belief and then the practice of it. So you bringing up psychologies, that's a very fascinating thing. And, back to that leadership and hierarchy thing that they have a problem with this, and I've mentioned this several times lately, there have been excellent papers since the 70s describing the actual hidden hierarchy within feminism, how there's always a hierarchy, but because it's not explicit, nobody has any control or accountability over who's actually pulling the string. It's all backroom deals,
and it's obvious who the leaders are.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm shouting over you there, but it's obvious. Yeah. Blindingly obvious. But it's not providing leadership because it's not explicit. It's backroom.
Yeah.
But where were you going with that?
Well, I was going with just the psychological level of I guess the manifestation of purity spirals, the manifestation of pylons, the manifestation of mean girlism there's a sociological component, there's a psychological component, there's a biological component. But on a psychological level, how do you comprehend what's going on and then kind of be a little bit objective, not take things personal just for a moment, not feed into your own psychology, and just understand that these are social and psychological dynamics here. And if we can understand them, maybe we can change them or call them out or notice them and avoid them when they crop up. Right?
The psychology behind bullying for me is quite clear. That generally it's driven by maybe one or two or a few people who are seeking power. There's very much a power.
Okay, power keeps on coming up. What do you mean power?
Yeah.
What is power?
Well, we've kind of, to distill it down, like the psychologists disagree with their jargon, but they fundamentally agree that there's in and around 5 or 6 emotional needs that we all have, and they're not wants, they're needs. So William Glasser did a good analysis of it, and an emotional need would be, for example, power stroke status stroke recognition for your contribution, recognition of who you are. And some of us have a high need for that. And those people who have a high need for that will tend to do pretty great things. Like my president in Ireland is a lovely man. He's a poet, he's a philosopher, and he would have a high need for power because he's ended up as president. You and I, because we're doing podcasts and things like that, clearly have a high need for power. We wouldn't be doing it otherwise. And there's other people, I can see it in my own children, there's other people who just go, nah, I'm not going to do a podcast. No, well, because I don't have that high need for power. I don't want that. No.
Are you saying a podcast is a stepping stone to power? Is that why we're so threatening to the man?
There's no way you are doing a podcast if you didn't want some sort of recognition or acknowledgement of something. You're not there for any other reason. 100%. I'll fight you on that one. Yeah, but I don't think it's a bad thing because you can do great things. Nelson Mandela, Michael T. Higgins, our president, he's a great man. It's not. People think power is an ugly word, and it's not necessarily. It's a feeling of, I will do great things, will you recognise my great things, if you follow me? And some people have it strong, and some people don't. While a bully will be somebody who is basically willing to do anything to get a bit of power. They don't have integrity with their power need, if you follow me. So they'll do whatever. And you saw them when they were 10 or 11, and they would beat up the little guy, the quiet little gentle kid. Why? Because they wanted to have a shot of power. They'd be bad at maths and the teacher would give out to them, and they would immediately rob the lunch on the kid beside them just to kind of get some power back in their mind. So this is a very power-driven, bullying is a very power-driven.
But it's not constructive. It's exploitative. It takes. It doesn't create.
Yeah, but
other than humor, I guess humor gets to create laughter. There's a surplus to humor. But
some power can be lovely. You can be a great leader if you have a high power need, and you can be a horrible bully if you have a high power need. It's just, it depends.
Well, I'm just proposing that it's not the power. The difference between the bully and the president is that one's generative and the other one's exploitative. Like one's.
I don't know about that. I hear you, but I don't know if I agree, because you could argue that, lots of bullies, Putin and Hitler, there can be creativity in what they're thinking, if you follow me, but they're abusing their power, they're dehumanizing people, they're ruthless, they're exploitative. Are they necessarily not creative? I'd say some of them probably are. Some of them come up with, extraordinary concepts and stuff, and I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. What I'm more interested in is that that's what they're driven by. And the only way to combat that is to be aware that this is a power need. And imagine if you had a child and they were getting bullied. You need to know what's going on, what's the dynamics, who's the power, who's looking for the power, and why are they getting power off this child. But beyond that, there's also other needs. You know what I mean? They're not our only needs. We also have, some people have a very high need for love and belonging. And that's a need to kind of be part of the group. And that would be the sidekicks. And they just want to be wherever the group is, and they don't care who the group is, and they will lose their integrity just to be part of, let's all do this, let's all do that. And it's a kind of that feeling of belonging. And it's very nice for people if you have it, but they will stay in groups much longer than they should because they like the feeling of belonging. And it can be very detrimental to a person. You can end up in a horrible scene, and you can find you do it regularly in your life, and you think, I'm back in a horrible scene because I like being part of the crowd. And so that's an equally very, very, it can be a lovely thing to be part of it, love and belonging, you like the group, and it can be an insidious, pernicious part of you. It's how do you manage it? Do you keep your personal integrity and your decency, or do you just go it all for your need? Am I making sense there?
Yeah, now you're adding like solidarity, decency. You just have all these moral things that you're like foisting upon it, self-control. You have such
Where's my Bible? I know.
Such high
I know, and I know how
standards.
horrible preachy I am. I'm well aware.
No. I'm kidding, but
But
just
man, it's just when horrible things are going on, you gotta just suddenly just say things sometimes. You can't just start faffing around and pretending things aren't happening and there isn't such a concept as decency. We've got to, on some level, just realise that you can be too clever. And I think our era is just trying to be too clever, too kind of verbal, too wordy, too kind of always coming back with the clever rhetoric. And honestly, are you doing the right thing or are you doing the wrong thing?
sorry, I participate
Am I
in that.
terrible?
But I wanted what you're talking about, these different human needs. One thing that I wanted to ask earlier on is that bullying behavior seems so destructive. How do these people maintain, or how does this not just implode groups, or how do these negative sociopathic, using that term broadly, behaviors not end up just casting the bully out and making the bully no one? And it's that belonging. They, I think, maybe have an intuitive charisma to them that they can take power, but they can also maintain the power of belonging. So they know who to give scraps of meat to, in a way, to sustain their status.
When you study bullying dynamics, and I have a lot, you do see a real animalistic instinct of knowing when to throw a bit of meat to the sidekick. And, they have this extraordinary way, and if you watch any kind of past bullying leader, like, any, dreadful despot, you'll see that they had this way of keeping everybody on their toes so you could get thrown out. So play nice with me because you could get thrown out. So they have a really instinctive way of keeping everybody nervous and kind of keeping everybody and that there does feel like there's a kind of a feeling within, certainly in the kind of the online space that I'm kind of hanging around with, is that everybody's afraid to speak up. There seems to be an awful lot of fear, an awful lot of you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't do this, you have to stay away. And there can be this, I've seen and you've seen, I'm sure, let's say when people with DSDs were getting piled on, there's this shrieking silence, just this kind of, because they're afraid of getting the eyes of the bully, of the mob. And it's happened in history thousands of times before. You keep your head down so as not to get the eyes of the mob. And it's a horrible kind of fear that people are coming from. Well,
I mean, the DSD thing, the disorders or differences of sexual development, their community, which is a very small community that did not sign up for this gender thing at all, and were being used first, I think, by TRAs, and now are being used and abused by the gender critical side to make some sort of really purist line on the sand. And one of the reasons that I'm attracted to the gender debate is that there's something, sorry to use this word, there's something spiritual about gender. There's something that there's a mystery and a revelation there that we can't quite grasp. And everybody that tries to grasp it, the harder they try to grasp, the crazier it gets. It's just something it's a mystery why man and woman were created as man and woman. It's something it's above us, So there's always just this grasping. And then there's people who can't relish the mystery or be humble before a mystery. They're the ones who become fundamentalists. They're the ones who become the literalists. They're the ones who become the Bible thumpers and the purity spiralists and stuff like that. So you see that. I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, I just want to take you up on something while you think about where you were going. I don't know if I agree with you, if there is such a mystery, but maybe there is. I'd say you're probably more spiritual than I am. I kind of just say, yeah, maybe there is, but why did I become a woman and why did you become a man? You could say it's just a trick of the cells, I don't know. But certainly from the moment 6 weeks in utero or whenever it is, I'm sure I'll be shocked because I got it wrong, the impact of testosterone on your body is kicking in and is impacting your brain, your personality, your everything. And the same likewise for me with estrogen. And this pretends that this isn't massively shaping us. is just laughable, because I'm an incredibly hormonally charged person, and I know, like, I'm just hilariously. So estrogen is very prominent in my world. I know, you know what I mean? And so because of perhaps I'm such an impact of estrogen on me, my God, and progesterone or whatever else, you know what I mean? I don't know, I'm no biologist, but I do think that that's not massively.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Once you start to try to grasp with the biology of it and try to define male and female, because for some reason at some point in your argument you needed to be very explicit about what male and female are. Maybe because you're trying to escape that gender ideology that's just warping and screwing around with everybody, and it's very flux. It's the opposite of order, so you need to find order. So in Helen Joyce's book Trans, she stands on gametes. Like, that's where she builds male and female, from the gametes. And I'm like, well, does that satisfy our social need for archetypal, stereotypal male and female deities and archetypes? And there's a whole rich thing going on in our psychology, and then the hormonal thing on our brain and stuff. And unfortunately, the DSD, the intersex condition, and I know they don't like this term, that differences of sexual development escape that biological essentialism, because it shows, and that's why the TRAs use it, it shows that there is variance in biological sex. So we can import that into gender ideology and say that gender is just this magic spot in your brain where your feelings of true self emanate, right? So the DSD law, what I was just bringing up is that unfortunately the DSD group community did not sign up for this, and they're being batted around, and now they're being attacked, right? So how do we... I know, in activist terms, nobody needs a hero. It's not my job to rescue them or anything. But how do I properly...
Benjamin?
Yeah, exactly. White knight. How do I properly lift up that community and separate them from the bullshit, right? And so my tact would be, because I have a platform that's based on people listening to people in good faith, and every once in a while somebody crosses the line and they'll get dogpiled on. I'm sure that there are DSD individuals who are fine with being dogpiled on as long as they can get their story out there. And I don't need to necessarily stand up for them on the Twitter bashing or call out the people who are calling out them. I can just completely circumvent the drama and say there's something much greater than that. There's something much more mature about having a human discussion that makes all that pettiness just, like you say, it's a waste of time, so why even engage with it? But at the same time, people do, when you bring up shrieking silence about standing up for that community, it is important to act on that level if that's where the the busyness is, on that fighting things and that politicking. But there's also greater stability in content and real content, right? And that's, I know that I'm only in this for power, but I really want great content. I guess I want the content.
Yeah, but that's the great thing about people who like power. They tend to try to do really great stuff because they want the power, which is great. Every writer, every artist, every great producer has been seeking some sort of recognition. I shouldn't get fixated on the word power, because it's also recognition, validation. There's lots of other more what's the word? Palatable words than power. You can be a great person and still have a high power need. But it's I really do think, I know I might come across old-fashioned and preachy, and I'm sorry if I do, vaguely. But at the same time, I just think it's just so essential that you kind of you do right by people, because you've lost everything if you're not doing that, and that's why I wrote the book Bully-Proof Kids, and that's why I'm sitting here talking to you. You know what I mean? I didn't have to get into any of this, but it's the right thing to do.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
So it's your holy war. This is how you get your power. You're gonna stop bullying. And then take all the credit?
No, I won't stop bullying. No.
Just teasing you, Stella.
As God is my judge. I will take it on. No, why I wrote the book Bully-Proof Kids was because so many kids were coming to me, and I thought, man, I'd love to help these kids kind of, because what happens when you get bullied, it's really pernicious. You buy into what the people are saying. So somebody tells you you've made a mistake, and you think, Jesus, they're right, I made a mistake. What the hell? Of course you made a mistake. You're human. Of course you did. And so my job is to make sure that people don't buy into the concept that you can't make a mistake. Of course, you're going to make a mistake. I've no doubt made many mistakes in the middle of this conversation. And that is fine, because we don't live in a dictatorship, and it's all right. We've got to, it's become so puritanical that it's really out of control at this stage. I just think psychologically it's become so oppressive that there must surely be some sort of backlash on the way to this. Another person got cancelled today in Ireland, and it's just like another comedian. Just like, wow, another one bites the dust. Another one gone. Jesus.
Well, he should make a podcast. Get his platform back.
When is it going? When are we going to get to the point where there's only podcasters? There's no listeners.
Well, we'll all be interviewing each other, so we'll have an audience.
We are doing this.
Well, we all have to do the dishes at some point, so somebody's going to put on the podcast.
I love them, I must say.
Stella, so your book is releasing at the end of March. Bully-Proof
I have
Kids.
it here.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yes, here's my book.
And that's going to be released in the UK. Is it going to be possibly released in the United States, or people in the United States, can we get our hands on them?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Is it in Gaelic or in English?
There. No, it's not in Gaelic.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, but we can sell it to you guys, you Yanks. We can sell it over the World Wide Web on Amazon or any of those. Yeah, it's available. I really hope that it does make an impact, because I really think it's important that we equip ourselves for the tricky people that we're going to meet. And can I just say one thing, that when you teach a kid how to handle tricky people, you've given them a gift for life. That great song, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. When you can teach a kid that, you've taught them everything. Sometimes you just have to get the hell out, because it's just awful. And sometimes you can be clever and you can, work around things, That's the concept. The gambler.
Sounds it's more, I wanted to speak with you about it because bullying is a good topic in and of itself, but it's also very prevalent in adult communication right now. So it's not just about kids. Like, all the things that you're saying in there, I know are absolutely applicable to online lifestyles and adult relationships, workplaces, and any given place where particular people congregate. It's going to have power dynamics, right? So
everywhere where people are, there's and we've got to learn to deal with them. I hope it'll turn in our community. We'll
see. I don't know, but
really,
you can always,
I'll look out for you if you look out for me.
I'll look out for you. I feel like we're ending on a Muppet song. And I'll look out for you. If
You've got a guitar behind you. Go on then.
I do. I know. It's a resonator though. It doesn't. So you also have a podcast with Sasha Ayad, Gender Wider Lens. Brilliant stuff. You guys are interviewing all the people that I already interviewed, but you're doing a much better job than I did.
Well, I tell you, we interviewed somebody amazing today. The Dutch team that brought in the puberty blocker.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, really?
Yeah, it was powerful.
Man.
Yeah,
the resources that you guys are generating are phenomenal stuff. You guys are really getting into all the different communities and the scientists and the thinkers. Is there any events that you guys are doing or that you want to plug?
Very much so. If you happen to have this out before March the 12th.
Detrans Awareness Day.
Yes, Detrans Awareness Day. Genspect are running a webinar, and I think it's going to be absolutely brilliant, and I really do. It's a group of detransitioners who are speaking on different subjects. So, all the greats like Helena and Keira Bell and Sinead Watson, Claire, Carol Sarah Patches, some really good, some great names, some men, like, you know what I mean? No. And some of the subject matters, it's going to be really good, and I think it's really important that we support it and we give them their platform. So that's the biggie.
Okay.
The D-Trans webinar by Genspect. That's the
Okay.
biggie.
I will link that in the description. People
Thank
can
you.
sign up for that. I think the tickets are a reasonable price, and they
Oh
go
yeah,
to...
they're not only reasonable, they're free for anybody who has financial difficulties. So.
Okay, yeah. So there's a sliding
Yeah.
scale, and also the money goes to supporting a group that's concerned with raising awareness around the medicalization and slowing or even stopping the medicalization, the unnecessary medicalization. Here, I am mincing words of specifically gender confused youth.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, Stella, thank you so much for your time. This is the best conversation we've had so far. So maybe the next one we can actually start wrestling for power, just out in the open, some sort of Highlander kind of thing. You know,
Right, I'm on.
Only one podcaster can survive, kind of thing.
We'll have a kind of a duel. I'm on. I'll bring Sasha and she'll distract you. And I'll win.
No. That's hitting below the belt. Come on.
I know, I'm ruthless.